If function nested. We have already learned how if function works. If you do not remember well how, I recommend you to review the last exercise. Now, we are going to check the power of this function when we have to compare not only between two options, pass or fail, but more than two. For instance, we can program if function to assess if a student deserves an A, B, C, D, E, or F mark, taking into account just their average mark. Let's start with a typical example of couch potatoes and their time. We will use Excel to deduce the final sign in the football pools, 1, X, or 2. When the first team at the end of a football match wins, the sign turns into 1. When the first team at the end of a football match loses, the sign turns into 2. When there is a draw, the sign turns into X. Have a look at the football matches in the tables. Focus on football pool sign column. There we are going to program if function to give automatically the correct sign from the final result. In the first match, Aston Villa beats Newcastle. Then we know that the proper sign is 1. Let's go step by step. Click on F4 cell. Then type equal sign followed by the word C and open a parenthesis. Next step, we have to compare the cells which have the goals scored. So we will type D4 bigger than E4. That way, we are comparing if it is true that Aston Villa won Newcastle, and so it is. Keep on typing a semicolon. It means that the next word will be the value that Excel has to give back if the comparison is true. So next to the semicolon, type 1. It is not necessary to use quotation marks when we type numbers. Then type another semicolon. In this step, we have to write the value that Excel has to give back if the comparison is false. However, it can be false, but it has two possibilities for false, X or 2. The way we are going to solve this enigma is nesting another if function in the place reserved for the false case. Then, next to the last semicolon, type C and open another parenthesis. Now we are inside another if function in which we have to program the other two possibilities, X or 2. Then we have to compare the cells which have the goals scored again, but thinking about those possibilities. So type D4 equal to E4. That way, we are comparing if it is true that the final result was a draw. It was not in that case. Next to the last comparison, we will tap another semicolon sign. Then we have to insert the proper sign which makes the comparison true. A draw, so type a X. Relax for a moment. We have compared in the first if function if the first team have beaten its opponent. If it is true, if function will give back a 1 and that's all. If it is not true, the first if function will check the second part where there is another if function. The second one will give back an X sign if the second comparison is true, a draw, which is not true in the first match. Then we could think about starting another if function, but be clever. If the first comparison and the second one are not true, the correct sign is 2. So finally, we have to type a semicolon followed by the number 2. And don't forget to close all parentheses we have opened. Let's have a look at the whole function. That way, we can assess as many possibilities as we have and we call it if functions nested. As a challenge for you, we'll move on the last exercise with the students' marks. In the assessment column, you have to program each student's cell to set automatically the next shines depending on conditions below. Good luck! Do not be embarrassed for asking teacher for help.